How did you hook up with Throbbing Gristle in the first place? When did you meet Jen, and was it Jen that you met first?
Well, Jen wrote me because I knew a lot of people. He used to do a lot of correspondence art, and that's how I actually really met him. He wrote me, and then we started writing back and forth. And then when right after the prostitution show in England happened, they came over to America and went to LA and did a few things, and then came to San Francisco and stayed with me.
What year was that?
75, probably 75, right at the tail end of 75. And they stayed with me. I used to have this big place in downtown Berkeley in this sort of like halfway abandoned building, and so and we just got along really, really well. And it sort of progressed from there. And then I went over and stayed with them on and off different times, 76, 77. And it just sort of progressed and proceeded from there.
Mm-hmm. Well, you...
And that's right when they were first doing Throbbing Gristle and putting out their first releases and everything else like that. So it's just a matter of circumstance and being in the right place at the right time.
And you designed the logo?
I helped do that, yeah.
That was all in the 70s?
Yeah.
It seemed like, I don't know, like listening to those old interviews, it's like information gathering was one of your big things back then.
It still is.
How do you keep up with that?
Man, it's almost impossible now. I wish I had a bank of 5 computers that I could program with artificial intelligence and wake up in the morning and get the report I want. But you know, just look for things. On the internet is still pretty good.
A good source?
Yeah, good source. Yeah, but I use library. I use all kinds of things. Libraries, whatever. Call people up. Try and talk to people. But that's what I really need. A bank of 5. Change it. Yeah, well, now I need them to be hunting for me, see while I'm sleeping. That's what I'd really like.
Did you also work off just found objects in your environment?
Yeah.
So that was a lot of the inspiration is random stuff you'd stumble across.
Oh, well, especially because especially where Jen and them lived was in the East End of London, which is one of the oldest parts of London. So you would stumble across all kinds of things there. A really good environment for working on that kind of material.
With that mail art genre that was happening, did you see connections to the Dada movement and things like that?
Other people more saw connections like that. I didn't do that much mail art because a lot of people, in my opinion, like for instance, between me and Jen, the stuff that we would send back and forth was very personal amongst each other. So I more liked that idea rather than making 50 of something and sending it to 50 different people. So it got to be more like that, which was probably why I did less and less of it too. Although with some people I always had a connection with, because like the letters or the things that we would send back and forth, they were very personalized, like if you and I were really communicating. And it wasn't just, I'm going to do 50 of this and send it out to 50 different people. So it got to be more like that, which was, I think, unfortunate. Because I think a lot of the more interesting things were the things where people really had a connection with each other when they corresponded.
Did you find yourself still corresponding with Jen?
Not that much. Not that much. I guess, through... You can't really do the same thing like through email. I mean, it's much more fun to get... It used to be much more fun to get a whole big letter or package or something totally in the mail and you never knew what you were going to get, And I think, unfortunately, that's the downside of, email. I mean, the upside is, you can get it to someone immediately. But it's not really conducive to that yet. Although maybe when, there's more bandwidth and people send, little videos to each other, little movies to each other, I think then you're going to see it become more personalized again. But email is sort of like you can send a quick, dirty message to somebody and get it there right away.
Yeah, I think with websites now, to some extent, I see some really impressive stuff, but a lot of it's almost like too easy now. Like the technology makes it, there's no barrier to entry. Like with, mail art, you had to like get the paper, have an idea, put the thing together, get the postage, or it seemed like just that minimal amount of effort that you had to go through is more than what people have to do now to just type something and send it or grab a picture.
Well, I think even your website, I mean, like if I've seen some really great websites that I really like too, but I think it still can't be as personalized yet. But I think you're going to see people get more that way. I'm always a cynical optimist. So.
Yeah, I mean the pseudo person, familiarity of maybe like the bedroom is really, it's not the same kind of thing.
Not exactly. It could be though.
That's a different kind of personal.
That's a different kind of personality. But.
When did you start working with sound? When did you start recording things?
I used to do all kinds of weird experiments when I first lived in Berkeley, because especially like late at night, you'd get all kinds of people yelling and screaming, and ambulances going by, the police going by, stuff like that. And I had a great location where I could just set up a microphone and point it out the window, and you never know what you would come up with. So it's more from that angle.
Some of the stuff that Zeb was doing, things like that too.
Yeah, he used to do a lot of that.
There's a recording that he has. It's just an intersection in the city.
Uh-huh.
And it's really
great. And sometimes you're just there at the right time, and then you'll listen back to it and you'll go, wow, what made that sound? I don't even remember that.
I remember when the first Sony Walkman came out, that was like a major breakthrough, because we used to use these mono tape recorders, to record stuff.
Right.
As soon as you could get stereo field, that was just like this incredible thing, recording like bumps on the back of the bus, and when you could actually have them in the back and get the sound separation. That was like around 78 or something.
Yeah, the Sony Walkman, I loved that. Loved those machines. I still have two of them.
Yeah, I was surprised. Actually, we were talking to Peter, and those things showed up in the late 70s, mid 70s, and I thought, really, wow. Back then.
Yeah, I still have my.
Yeah, because you could hide it in a backpack. So if some lunatic was like ranting and raving on the bus, you could just be like right next to him. They wouldn't know that you were recording them. That was like
they had the little ones, and then they came out with this.
Yeah, the same one.
The Pro.
That's
this
nice.
This is still a great machine. I still use this machine for a lot of stuff.
And you've had that for?
I've had that, and it still runs, and I've never had any problems with it. Which is more than I can say for the Sony DAT portable machine I bought.
Right.
Junk.
Were the recordings that you did with for the industrial label with Throbbing Gristle, were those was that like the first kind of official release that you did?
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Real music.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that, about To Mom on Mother's Day and how that worked.
Oh yeah, that was interesting because I couldn't hear the music, so I had like headphones and I could just barely hear myself. And I didn't know what I couldn't hear the music, and then we just recorded it and dropped it in, and there it was. They wouldn't let me hear what.
Yeah,
they wouldn't let me hear the music.
There's something in one of these old interviews from like '79 when Jen was talking about we started this record label, and you were the first act that they signed, and what the terms of the contract was, and he wasn't allowed to hear the music, and he wasn't allowed to think about it, and he couldn't complain, and this is the way it's going to be.
Yeah, it was just like the ultimate, record contract that you get nowadays.
Remember that movie Phantom of the Paradise?
Yeah.
It's kind of like that.
So.
What about Vale, and when did you meet him, and how did he get into that?
Oh, geez, how did I meet Vale? Well, no, I'm one of the few people that probably did not meet Vale at the Mabuhay, which I never went to that much anyhow. I'm trying to think. I think Mark Pauline introduced me to Vale. Or maybe Jen introduced me to Vale. One of those two introduced me to Vale. That's how I sort of met Vale.
Were there any other archival type people that were documenting the scene back then? That seems to be his magazine seems to be the earliest one that I really see documenting the thing.
Oh, there was what was it? Search and Destroy. And then in LA there was Slash, and then in I'm trying to think what was Brad Lappin's magazine? There was like No Magazine, and I can't remember. Yeah, I can't. And then Brad Lappin had this magazine that I can't remember the name of. There weren't really that many. There weren't really that many documenting too many scenes, and then there was like Jim Jacoy doing a lot of photography. In fact, his book just came out recently on like the San Francisco punk stuff, which is actually a really good book.
Yeah, he's an exhibit I think at Aquarius now.
Yeah. So.
And then Ed Culver down in.
Yeah, and Ed Culver and there are a couple other photographers.
Ruby Ray was doing stuff up here.
What?
Ruby Ray was.
Yeah, she was doing stuff up here, but she was also doing things that weren't as straight documentary. So she would sort of combine a lot of things that she was doing, more artistic.
Because that seemed to fit more with kind of like what Vale was doing in a way.
Right.
Kind of complemented because his stuff was more reporting.
Reporting, and then she sort of handled more the artistic end. And then she did a lot of work with the guys in Factrix.
Uh-huh.
Gave them a lot of visuals for a lot of their shows.
Were you in touch with a lot of people down in LA in the late 70s?
The people that I knew most, not too many. The people that I really knew mostly is who really introduced me to more people in LA was like Don Bowles of the Germs. Really, 45 Grave. I knew those guys really. Don Bowles is a great guy. And in fact, we did a show at the LA Press Club, and they delivered this fantastic like PA and just dumped it out. Just dumped the PA out. And we're sitting there, geez, how in the fuck do you even connect this thing? And Don showed up, and he and I just sat there all day and went through this mess of equipment and, connected it all together, and we didn't blow up. I mean, this really super expensive PA, that we hardly paid anything for. This guy just showed up, threw it all out, and there's like,
it sounded
wires.
Really good. I remember that show.
Yeah,
It
really sounded good, but we would have never got it together if Don hadn't showed up.
And then Ruby Ray had these living slides that she made with like brine shrimp and
with
stuff.
With brine shrimp all swimming around that she projected.
Colors and stuff.
Yeah, that.
And she projected it. You could see the brine shrimp swimming in the slides while you guys were playing. And then you showed that Super 8 film.
SXX80.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there was this one huge beefy skinhead guy that was right in front of me, and halfway through the film, the guy fainted and just dropped to the floor. He's out cold.
Yeah, that was a good show.
So that was kind of funny. Like the scariest guys in the crowd were the ones that fainted, and the nerdy little twitchy guys were all like,
"Yeah,
this is cool." Yeah,
they liked it.
So you didn't have quite the same. I talked to Genesis about the LA show, the Throbbing Gristle show.
Uh-huh.
Were you down there for that?
No, I wasn't down there for that.
Okay. Because it's interesting because they had a really different view of things. Because when we were in the audience, it was like a life-changing show for a lot of us. But they really saw it as like this real kind of hassle, and there were so many people, and they couldn't deal with just the chaos of that many people. So it seems like they didn't really see like what was going on the other side of the stage.
Well, sometimes it's hard, you don't quite know what's going on with the audience, and even how you're coming across. And of course, at that time, they weren't getting along so good, which, I'm not giving out any secrets. I mean, they weren't getting along so good. And I think that also colored the whole situation, for them, unfortunately, and I know, because I know when they got to San Francisco, they still weren't getting along so good, but I think they just had a little bit better time here. Maybe, too, because when they got here, they weren't in as confined a space with each other.
I think Vox Pop also blew out the right side of the PA before they
Oh, well, that happened, those weak PAs, that happens. So you just use the left side.
Vox Pop played so loud they drove half the audience out into the
street.
Well,
maybe that was another reason why they didn't like it. I don't know. Unfortunately, I didn't get to go to that show. I was actually busy up here making sure everything together was for the San Francisco show.
In general, there's usually kind of a Bay Area antagonism towards LA that people in Southern California are usually oblivious to. Did you ever?
I actually liked LA in some ways. I mean, the reason why I liked LA in some ways was that people would introduce you to other people a lot more easier, and I'm just talking from my own personal viewpoint, and they would connect you up with other people sometimes a lot more easier too.
Yeah.
You know, because the money, you know, there's in some ways there's more money there and it's more liquid. Although trust me, LA has its downsides too, but for me that's just what personally happened to me.
Yeah, well, I noticed it was always less cliquey in the way that people could come and go from the scene,
right.
And it's true that people were really trying to help each other out.
Right.
Because it was so hard to put stuff together anyways.
Well, also because in LA there were more other things happening, even just in music, because it's a center of the music industry, right? So people had to somewhat stick together a little bit harder if they were going to try and do anything, because there were less venues for them to be able to play in too.
And the
from my
sheriffs were
perception,
constantly
and the sheriffs would show up and shut everybody down and kick everybody out and arrest people
and beat everybody up and break their cars.
Yeah, right.
I mean, it was real violent. I guess that didn't happen up here.
No, that hardly ever happened up here. It was much more, for lack of a better word, mellow scene. Yeah, it was I find LA much more interesting in some ways because of all of that.
In that year that Throbbing Gristle came through, I was trying to explain to them that I don't know if they ever realized that when they came to LA in 1981, like May of 1981, that was like the peak of the LA punk scene,
right,
where the sheriffs were starting riots every single night.
Right. And
it was just very like scary. You didn't know when you went out what you were going to get into. And that was the kind of crowd that there was 2,000 of those high school kids and, you know, really people on like every kind of drug imaginable.
Then the
sitting there.
The LA Death Squad kids and the sheriffs, two bad groups at each show.
So yeah, I think they just kind of like walked into this thing and
they didn't have any understanding about what it was probably like, you know, because they're coming from, you know.
And of course, we never realized that they wouldn't have had that understanding because we're like in the middle of it. So
yeah, well, you know,
interesting thing.
And it's not like they did more than one show in LA either, you know. Or did they do more than one show?
I think that was it.
Yeah, I think they only did one show, so you just come in and you don't know what's really going on.
No, yeah, I mean, Genesis was talking about how oblivious they really were just around them. A lot of it's because, you know, they were not getting along so well.
Right.
Already, you know, Genesis was talking about how suicidal he felt at the time, you know, how really depressed.
Yeah, he was not happy about this situation. In fact, I don't think any of them were that happy about the situation, but...
Had they already decided that they were going to end the project, do you think, before they came over to play those shows?
You know, that's a really good question, and I wouldn't...
And we forgot to ask them that.
Yeah, that's a really good question that you should have asked them, but you didn't. But I would think they were probably right on the verge, you know. Maybe if all those shows or everything was really nice, maybe they would have reconsidered. But I sort of doubt it. And I think it was... You know, I mean, that's what happens sometimes. You've just reached this point where you've got to move on
yeah.
and split apart, or it's just becomes so much of a hassle. You go, well, why am I doing this? You know, it's not enjoyable anymore. And, you know, if you're not getting a giant amount of money, then you know, because people will put up with a lot of things when big cash in, there's a picture. But if you're not getting that, then you got to go, well, why am I doing this? Because, you know, you didn't, at least for me, I never got in to not do what I wanted to do, you know. And if it becomes this whole big battle where, you know, now you're doing things you don't want to do, especially as far as music is concerned. I mean, I'll put up with a lot of stuff on other kind of projects, but music is the one thing that, for me, I wanted I got into to do what I want to do and to have fun doing it too. That doesn't mean it's not hard work, and all kinds of other crazy shit can happen. But you got to draw the line in the sand somewhere.
So what kind you've been? Yeah, you were at a lot of some of the earlier shows. You were at performances in England, and tell us a little bit about describe maybe a memorable TG moment.
Oh, memorable! Jeez, let's put him on the spot and nail him to it.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you're visible in some of the videos, and I can see you in the background taking pictures and
Oh, I think one of the things I liked, one of the nicest shows, I guess for lack of a better word, was the recording that they did inside their little studio that they had, their practice studio. Yeah, and yeah, that was one of the nicest shows I'd ever seen anywhere. And they just had sort of an invited audience of a wide range of different people too, and that show was just one of the most enjoyable shows I ever saw, and was much more, I guess, much more melodic and instrumental. And the crowd was really good. It was just something that normally doesn't happen too often. So that's one of my favorite shows. Yeah, without a doubt.
That was kind of a smaller friends.
Yeah. And no one knew. They had just sent out these little invites to. They didn't know how many people were actually going to show up or not show up, and the people didn't know exactly what they were going to do or not do, and people just came in and boom, they did it, one nonstop, one take. That's it. That's the recording. And yeah, that was a really great show. I think everybody was there had a really good time.
And about the ultrasonic,
which shows you that some of the smallest shows can be the best damn shows that you'll ever see.
If you record them.
Whether you record them or whether they're recorded,
anyways, but if you
whether they're recorded or not,
right.
I mean, you can end up maybe only 6 people show up or something, but if it's the right 6 people, you can have the best time,
Right.
That's my opinion.
It's interesting now with technology though that you can record everything and that you can have that kind of live happening and somehow capture that, because I guess a lot of artists kind of have that problem of if you're alone in the studio not being able to perform the same way as when there's other people there to.
Well, there is a theory that you're sort of feeding off each other to a certain degree, and especially if it's a more casual situation, people can start yelling and saying all kinds of stuff, and that can make it go in a really interesting direction.
Give the audience noisemakers.
Well, yeah, that, or just even comments that people will make, or perceptions that they'll have, or they'll say, "Oh, that song was a load of rubbish," and you go, "Whoops, yeah, I guess it was." So I will never do that again. I mean,
You were asking about to say something about ultrasonic sound.
Actually, all of them were talking about the ultrasonic experiments with like crowd control and things like that.
Oh yeah.
And were you also actively interested in that?
Oh, I was definitely interested in that. I had done a lot of research on it, and we did a bunch of little experiments in their studio all the time, and I'm still interested in that. Hypersonic is coming, so watch out. Boy, there's going to be a lot of problems with that. Know about that? Type it in on the internet, hypersonic sound. Man, it's projected.
Oh, right.
Even deaf people can hear it, supposedly.
And with the new military-industrial complex funded by the new Bush.
Well, the scary thing about it is, I sort of predict. Here's my very tiny prediction, which I'm going to make. I think once that starts coming out, I bet you're going to see rise in schizophrenic murders, because people are going to be hearing voices in their head. And the really sad thing, I think, is kids growing up. Once it comes out, the kids that come after that growing up, where are these voices coming from? Because evidently, I haven't tested it out. I'd really like to go down. I think the company's in San Diego. I'd really like to go down and test a lot of it out and see how it really sounds. But if it works the way on their website that it works, and even deaf people can hear it, man, that is scary. That's just like putting any kind of voice in someone's head that you want to.
Right.
They want to use it for commercials.
Add placement while you're walking in the store so you can hear it clearly over the din.
That's right.
Well, there's the ability to actually target an individual, whether or not that individual can be surrounded by other individuals, and still you can target your space.
Hey, they can use your cell phone and through GPS be following you all through the entire city, telling you all kinds of stuff. I mean, I don't know, that is kind of really an iffy situation.
The creepy crawly government.
It is pretty creepy crawly because sound is one of those things that you don't realize how effective it can be because it just sort of comes in. You can seep in.
Yeah, well, I know the U.S. was using it a lot in Iraq. There was a lot of stories about that. They would go in with the big loudspeakers first before they went in and started shooting.
Yeah, but this is even scarier because this you can just totally project right into just one. Like, in other words, there's 5 of us in this room with your son. So they can just be totally projecting the sound into just one of us, and who knows what kind of psychological effects that's going to have in really the long run. It's pretty interesting technology. It'll be interesting to see how effective it is. Something to definitely check out. And it's on its way, and it's going to be really big for marketing. But it's not just going to be used for marketing. Come on, the
next generation is going to be genetically engineered anyway. So it's just the tip of the iceberg, anyways.
You could say everyone is genetically engineered. It's the question of what type of genetic engineering.
Yeah, and how methodical and
is it?
Drastic it is.
And who's making the decisions, and when they're basing it. It's interesting when you look at DNA. There's a lot of people that talk about junk DNA. Well, junk DNA, in my opinion, is not junk. It's for some reason it's there for a reason. I don't believe that nature puts in that much junk redundancy. So if the environment changes, what you may consider junk DNA today can be maybe really valuable, 50 to 100 years from now. So the way that they're looking at all this, they don't understand what they're doing at all. Come on. No. I don't believe that they do. It's too new. Really. Yeah, it has to play itself out. Even experimentally wise, it's going to have to go on for a long time before you really see what is going to really occur.
And the unfortunate thing is that it's already been introduced into our greater environment.
Yeah, of course.
With no real understanding
of what they're doing. It's a load of bullshit, if any, Love to get into some public debates with some of these people. Because it's one thing to say, okay, we're attempting to do something and we don't really understand what we're doing. It's another thing when you think you understand what you're doing and then you just go full pedal to the metal. And then later on, hey, asbestos used to be safe. Radiation used to be safe. All these things used to be safe, right? And then 50 years later, they turn out to not be so safe.
Music and sound used to be safe.
Yeah.
Music and sound used to be safe.
Used to be safe.
The show in San Francisco. What do you remember about that show? I mean, were you involved in? You said you were up here, kind of trying to make sure that everything was going okay.
Yeah, make sure that everything was together, and I did a lot of the engineering on the show. So, what was interesting about that was there were people from everywhere. People drove from Kansas and all these other places, and we were like, wow. I mean, they had to come. Some people came really far, and it was real. I don't know. It was so busy that in some ways I missed out actually on a lot of it. Because Don Bowles was running the board, and I was making sure the recording was going. We were just concentrating on trying to make sure we got a decent recording, So I missed probably, I don't know, you know how it is when you're doing all that. I missed sort of about half the show, really. But it was a great show. I mean, what was amazing was all the different people that I met and people that had come from just places who were like, how do you even find out about this? Because it wasn't like, we had ads on television or in newspaper or anything.
But the scene was like that then. It was
it
so
was
grapevine and underground.
All the people would show up from the strangest places, and you'd get a letter from someone. You'd go, "How do you even know who I am?"
To be in.
I'm sure you experienced some of that. You must have got letters from people and wondering how did they even find you, let alone.
Yeah, well, we get a lot of European letters from Greece and Italy.
See?
Yeah, I get email like that all the time now.
See, and you wondered wow. See, you have a big life in Greece and Italy that you know absolutely hardly nothing about.
Right.
And if you went to Greece and Italy at the right time, you'd probably be like, wow, you probably just have a great time.
Well, actually, I've been going to Italy the last couple of years, and I actually met some people that were
people you talked,
that knew about
corresponded
with, and it was like one.
And wasn't that a great experience? I'm sure it was a really good experience.
You have that really cool connection, and then they realize that you're just like this normal person, and then they're even more like, well, here, come have dinner at my house, and we'll talk.
And that's some of the most valuable things about when you do these type of things that can happen. I think, in some ways, to me, I think that's the most valuable things that really do happen.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's what really makes it really worthwhile, in my opinion.
People.
People and these strange people that you'll meet and the situations that you'll get into, and you'll just wow, how does this person even know who I am? And then they're really nice to you, and you get along with them, and you're on the same wavelength in a lot of ways, and that I think is what really makes the whole thing.
That happened
worthwhile.
to me in Japan too. I was going to dinner with these guys that were friends of my business partner, Scott Generic, and they were big fans of his stuff. So I went out to dinner with them, and they didn't know who I was. I was just this guy's friend. So they were polite, but they weren't really, they didn't really have anything to say to me, and they were talking mostly in Japanese. And then all of a sudden they found out, what band I was in. They were huge fans from when they were teenagers, and just the whole conversation just shifted. It's all of a sudden it's this whole different thing, and I was just laughing. I called Scott up that night, and we're just laughing about the whole thing. Oh, now I realize who you are. Okay.
Do you think that was that kind of the end of that kind of contact, that kind of making friends and meeting people? Is that something that you were aware of, or that was a consideration at all, kind of starting to just put something on a cassette and send it to somebody?
I think from the very beginning it was. I was kind of fortunate in that I got to, for one thing, I got to go to England and stay there and meet all kinds of people that I just would have never met, and plus TG attracted some really smart, interesting people, and so I guess I was kind of lucky, because sort of almost from the get-go, that's how it occurred.
Mm-hmm.
It was pretty natural too, and so in some ways I was kind of spoiled by that.
Were there ever any kind of stalker type people or?
Oh, there were lots of nutcases. There's always nutcases when you do anything in public.
Like scare. Have you ever had any real seriously frightening experiences?
Well, I'll tell you I'll tell you one that was pretty close. When I was in Psychic TV, we were in Germany, and man, that audience was totally mad. I never dealt with an audience like that. It was pretty packed. It wasn't the most gigantic audience, but they were packed into the space that we were in. And there was this guy in the front and I saw it. He had a palmed carpet knife, right? And he slit his forehead open, all this blood shot out, right? And then I thought, oh man, he's just gonna stab Jen or something. I was just ready to knock him out with my guitar, Because when I first saw him, he had the carpet knife, and these bouncers were freaking out, and I could see what was going on. Meanwhile, the other people in the band, they couldn't see because of the angle of where they
were. Were there ever any kind of stalker type people or?
Oh, there were lots of nutcases. There's always nutcases when you do anything in public.
Scare. Have you ever had any real seriously frightening experiences?
Well, I'll tell you I'll tell you one that was pretty close. When I was in Psychic TV, we were in Germany, and man, that audience was totally mad. I never dealt with an audience like that. It was pretty packed. It It wasn't the most gigantic audience, but they were packed into the space that we were in. And there was this guy in the front who, and I saw it, he had a palmed, like, carpet knife, right? And he, like, slit his forehead open, all this blood shot out, right? And then I thought, oh, man, he's just going to, like, stab Jen or something. I was just ready to, like, knock him out with my guitar, you know? Because when I first saw him, he had the carpet knife, and these, like, bouncers were, like, freaking out. And I could see what was going on. Meanwhile, the other people in the band, they couldn't see because of the angle of where they were, and they didn't understand what was happening. But I could see what this guy was going to do. And I was just watching this guy because I was going, like, what's he going to do with that? You know, he's obviously going to do something, you know. And then he, like, I don't know if he was high or drunk or none of the above. And then he, like, took it and, like, slit his forehead up, and all this blood, like, went everywhere, like, just all over the place. And the, like, bouncers, they all jumped back, you know. But then he didn't do anything else. He was just having a really great time, right? And then meanwhile, you know, I had blood all over me. Jen had blood all over him, you know. And this was, I was going, well, I hope this guy doesn't have AIDS. You know, that's the only you know, it was around the early times of that, you know. But at the same time, the guy, once he did that, he was totally calm. You know, and not manic anymore or anything.
Once I cut myself, I'm fine.
I was fine, you know. I
am Gita.
That's exactly what happened, you know. And after the show, like, we actually had him come, like, backstage and stuff, and, like, signed all this stuff for him, you know. And then it was really, really funny. But he was like, at that point, seemed like the nicest person you
Interesting.
would ever meet, you know. So that's one of the
snap judgment would have been
total, you know. Fortunately, I just didn't hit him as soon as I saw that, you know, because I would have felt really bad, like, afterwards. But I didn't know what he was going to do, and then the bouncers especially started freaking out, you know. And fortunately, that's all that really happened. But boy,
it was really
for a few. You know, for 30 seconds there, I was thinking, man, I'm going to just have to knock this guy unconscious.
I think people got stabbed at a whole bunch of shows that we were at when in LA. That was just kind of par for the course. And then at the Throbbing Gristle show, I just remembered that my friend told me there was a guy that went to that show that this guy had ripped him off on some drug deal, and he knew that the other guy was going to be there. Right. So this guy was, like, kind of schizophrenic, anyways. And
this is the guy that was at the show with a gun, right?
And he had a gun in one boot and this huge switchblade in his other boot, and they were, like, patting people down at the
but they didn't get him. Huh?
They didn't catch it. He was there the whole show, and I was just thinking, like, you know, I wonder with all this, like, mind control, ultrasonic frequency, if they realize that there's this guy, like, ready to have a psychotic breakdown with a gun.
You never know what people are going to do, I'll tell you that much.
I bet people have some film, but I bet it's just all, like, in different garages.
Man, yeah, I don't know. You know, that would have made a great movie. No one would have believed that.
But there was a lot of stuff, a lot of shows and things back then that it's just, you know, you didn't have video cameras, so
yeah.
Unless you actually wanted to hassle with 8mm film, it just didn't get documented.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, the only people that were really documenting stuff were, like, Joe Reese at Target.
Yeah. And then, like,
people
a lot
with
of
cameras.
A lot of that stuff burned down.
Right.
Still cameras,
It was really rare.
Yeah, it was, you know.
Well, there's a lot that's been lost, you know, like that.
But, like, my favorite place was, like, the Deaf Club. Did you ever go there?
I know.
Club. Oh, man, the Deaf Club. I saw some of the best shows there. It was actually a club for deaf people, and they started putting on, like, punk shows. I mean, the hell with the Mabuhay. The Deaf Club was it, man. And so you would go there, and, like, to just even order a drink, they had pads of paper and pencils, and so you would have to, like, because the bartender was deaf, you know, half the other people in there were deaf, and the other half were, like, you know, could hear, and for
a
like,
little while anyway.
Well, for a while, right? I guess they later became deaf, and so so the deaf people, and it had a great floor, and they used to take like a lot of the speakers and like pile them onto the floor, and the floor would shake, so the deaf people could feel it,
yeah.
And it was like the greatest scene, and everyone had pads of paper and pencils, because you didn't know if you were talking to someone, if they were really deaf or they weren't deaf. And at the end of the night, the whole floor would just be covered with these crumpled up paper and pencils and all this stuff, and because that's how people talk to each other, because half the people didn't know sign language, that were there. People would be trying to learn. It would be interesting, people trying to learn sign language.
Drunk people trying to learn sign language.
Well, they think they sort of know. Well, I mean, you can like get books on sign language, but that isn't how deaf people really speak to each other. Right. They don't spell out the whole word. There's all these little shortcuts and things that they use to communicate, right? So unless you take a really good class on sign language, or unless you're friends with a deaf person who shows you the real way to use sign language, it just was the most insane scene. So you'd have all these people like trying to learn sign language. Like I tried to learn sign language, and like deaf people would look at you like, "What the fuck are you signing?"
What did you call my mother?
What the hell? What are you saying? We don't say it like that. And then we go, and then try and show you the short way of saying it, and it was a trip. And then, everyone's writing notes and passing these notes back and forth, and you're going to get your drink, and you have to write out your drink and give it to the bartender and wait for the bartender to make you your drink. Oh, it was the most fun.
That'd be a great KFJC special, the Deaf Club.
Oh, it would be great. It'd be
a radio special on the Deaf Club. Oh. That'd be hilarious.
I was really upset when the fire department shut that down.
Mm-hmm.
That was the greatest place. That's the best club I've ever been to, bar none.
What kind of things were there? Who was performing?
Punk bands. You saw like the Bee People, and a lot of LA bands played there. It was a great venue, real mix of all types.
Mm-hmm. Who was around that you were that you found most interesting? Do you think at the time, like there's a lot of people playing a lot of music, but making a lot of sounds.
I find the LA guys kind of interesting. That whole group.
People.
Did you ever play with like Dead of Nature?
Nervous Gender, I liked.
Nervous Gender, sure.
Nervous Gender, I thought was like a great band, man. I can't believe Frank became a folk singer. I'm sorry, I still don't get it.
I'm really close friends with all those guys, actually.
Yeah, I saw them a bunch of times. I thought that was a really, really good band.
How about Flipper? How did they end up being the opening act at Kezar?
Oh, well, I actually, here's a good story. Ted Falcone and I were roommates at one time, if you can imagine that. Actually, I love Ted. He's a really good guy. And I had done a show previously at Kezar and then got banned because they didn't like what I did. So I was supposed to open for Throbbing Gristle, but they wouldn't let me open. The people that ran Kezar wouldn't let us come back.
But they'd let Throbbing Gristle come.
Well, they let them come back, and then and then somehow inadvertently, I don't know if I introduced them, or I don't know, somehow we got to talking, and then sort of Flipper's name came up, and they thought, yeah, that would be a good band to open for us. And then it sort of worked itself out naturally from that point. And it just sort of, I was surprised myself.
Did it work?
Yeah, I thought it worked. Because they wanted to have a show. They wanted to have a show that was just, not two of the same type of bands, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Jen had met Ted, and Ted and Jen had got along fairly
Vietnam
well.
Vet and Genesis.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They could talk.
Yeah, they could. They definitely could talk.
Yeah, it's interesting trying to.
They tear gassed my apartment together once. All these people were in it.
For the purpose of.
We had this sort of like party, for lack of a better word, and I don't know how the two of them showed up, but they both had like tear gas, and they just decided to let it off.
This party stinks.
Something like that, whatever. I think they egged each other on, and then they just both like let these tear gas things go off. My whole place was filled up with tear gas, and people were all running out and swearing, saying they want to kill Jen and Ted. Jen and Ted totally disappeared for about a half an hour after that happened, so they didn't get beat up or anything. So, yeah, that was pretty funny. I remember that. And for like weeks, my apartment smelled like tear gas.
What kind of role do you think drugs played in the scene? And that?
Drugs plays a role in every scene.
Drugs of favorite kinds of drugs. Were there drugs of what was the drug of the day? Was there a drug of the day? Was it Quaaludes still?
Well, I guess a lot of people. I never liked Quaaludes myself, personally speaking, but I'm sure a lot of people. In fact, I know a lot of people did.
Mm-hmm.
I carried home a lot of people passed out on Quaaludes.
Speed was very popular in the vats. Yes, I remember.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the vats. Well, you could see why. I hope this isn't becoming a pro-drug thing, but you could see why speed would become popular in the vats, because once you went into the vats, you didn't know whether it was daytime or nighttime, or so a lot of people would start working on things. So I could see why you would take speed in the vats. It totally made logical sense considering your environment. It's kind of like you would go into this vat, and then eventually you would come out. But
Chamber of Secrets.
Yeah, something like that. But people used all kinds of things, whatever they could get.
Yeah.
Just
Why
like
not?
now, whatever they can get.
Whatever they can
There's people using everything everywhere.
Especially kids.
Yeah.
Although, it certainly, it didn't seem to be as much of a drug motivated scene, if you look, whatever, drugs was such the use of drugs was such an out in the open kind of, in the 60s, it was like, drugs are good for you, take more acid and that kind of
right.
thing. And it really motivated or fueled, I think, a lot of what went on. And I suppose it did then too as well. But it wasn't.
Well, I guess you could say ecstasy was a pretty big part of the rave scene.
Yeah, so that's the one thing. That ecstasy wasn't part of that scene in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, because there wasn't any.
Right.
If it was there, I'm sure people would have gone ahead and used it.
Yeah.
And LSD was a little bit out of favor, just probably, being viewed as a hippie drug or whatever.
LSD was I would say was kind of too intense because it was too hard to go to some of these things under.
So instead, you would just smoke PCP. That was really big in LA, PCP.
Yeah, I never understood how that got big.
Oh.
That is scary. I've seen some scary things. People on that.
Elephant tranquilizers.
And then crack was later. I think crack actually had a lot to do with the scene kind of falling apart in the mid 80s.
Really?
That was my theory.
That's interesting.
Yeah, because people weren't smoking crack in the early 80s, late 70s and early 80s, and when they did, it seemed like people couldn't function at all.
But I thought that was a ghetto drug.
The world is the ghetto. You know that song?
Yeah, there you go.
There you go.
Well, there's
just different types of ghettos. Some ghettos have a lot more money, and some ghettos have hardly
ghetto of your mind. Yeah.
I'd say I've been really lucky. I met some of the best people. Besides the TG people, the guys in the Leather Nun were totally fantastic. The Factrix guys that I got to work with were some of the best people you could ever meet. And lots of other Cabaret Voltaire, those guys. So, and just other people too. People like Don Bowles. So, a lot of people, considering in the music scene, you can just meet a lot of people who aren't very nice or, I was really just fortunate for whatever reason, to meet some of the, really, I consider these people some of the best people you could ever meet. And that was, I think, the most important thing that happened to me personally.
Mm-hmm.
And I look on all of them, whether they get along with each other or not, I don't really care. I look on all of them with a lot of fondness.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe for a lot of people, it was, fun.
And I hope that to all these other people involved in whether it's music or whatever it is that you're doing, I hope that the same thing happens to them. Because that's what it's, to me, in the final analysis, that's what it's really all about.
Well, that's the final analysis is communication, right? And that's communication.
And hopefully you'll link up with people that you can really have that type of communication with. And they're definitely out there.
Mm-hmm.
They're not everywhere, but they're definitely out there, and you can find each other. And I just wish good luck to everybody like that. And that's my final... That's, I think, the most important thing I have to say.